Okay, welcome back. I am at 2737 Kings Way, or Kings Road, and it was an apartment, 142, and it's the home in 1963, or there used to be the home before he moved, of George de Mohrenschildt. Now, what you're looking at here are what looked to me to be new apartments. Okay, it was apartments in 1963, as you can look across the way here. And if you look at the street sign, just to show you, I'm on the Kings Road 2500 block, which is, so the 2700 block is up here at the where you turn at the street sign. It says Fairmount. And sometimes I've seen it both ways with George de Mohrenschildt's address. I've seen it Kings Road. I've also seen it Fairmount. So I'm just walking over here to Fairmount, and very unlikely that I'm going to find 2737 exactly. I'm just showing you the neighborhood, and we are back in Dallas. I've just left Fort Worth, and so this is now known as Berkshire Apartments or condominiums or whatever. And so this is the 3700 block of Fairmount, and still the 2600 block of Kings. So anyway, you get the point. That's what this is. One of these units is what George de Mohrenschildt lived in. And you say, well, who is George de Mohrenschildt? So that's because I talked about Ruth Paine, and of course that was clear over in Irving, and Ruth Paine was Lee Harvey Oswald's handler, and she wasn't always his handler. Lee Harvey Oswald was handed to her from his previous handler, and his previous handler in Dallas was this guy, George de Mohrenschildt. And so I want to talk about how they met and the circumstances came about, why George de Mohrenschildt would end up as Lee Harvey Oswald's handler, and then what happened to George de Mohrenschildt. Why didn't he remain Lee Harvey Oswald's handler throughout? October 7, 1962. So this is pretty close to the time period after which Oswald has returned from Russia. This is a notorious, in the eyes of the American people, defector. We know he is a fake defector, but the American people know him as a defector in 1962. He's a traitor, right? He's the guy that went to Russia, defected, said he was going to give up his American citizenship, claimed to be a Marxist-Leninist, he's going to give military secrets to the Russians, etc. Well then, as we've learned, 10 days after ZR Rifle was commissioned and signed off on all those creation documents, we learned it thanks to Mary Haverstick, Oswald is reassigned to come back to the United States and participate in his next mission, which of course he didn't know what that was. We know now he was going to be set up to be the patsy, the American asset, CIA asset, who's turned by the Russians, directed by the Russians to assassinate an American target on American soil. So he comes back here to Dallas, and on October 7th, 1962, de Mohrenschildt meets Oswald for the very first time. A day later, de Mohrenschildt convinces Lee to move from Fort Worth to Dallas. So this is the beginning of Oswald's time at the address on Beckley, North Beckley Avenue, when he moves into that rooming house. And of course, there's several houses first in Dallas. We've gone to some of them. There was the Neely house where the backyard photo was taken. There were several residences before he ends up at the rooming house. And of course his wife and kids end up back in Fort Worth with Ruth Paine. Anyway, he convinces Lee to move from Fort Worth to Dallas. Within a week, he helps Oswald, the recent defector from Russia, get a job at Jagger Stovall Childs. And this job involved him making charts and maps for the Pentagon, all of which required a top secret security clearance. Now, I've covered this in previous videos. How was a defector to the Soviet Union able to get top secret security clearances? And he had those in his military time. He worked at a U-2 base, etc. How was he able to maintain those through this time period when he defected to Russia and keep those top secret security clearances when he came to Dallas and started work at this job that was basically working with classified materials? They drew up classified air maps, aerial reconnaissance maps for the United States Army. And of course, it was George de Mohrenschildt who helped Oswald get that job. But one of the requirements for that job was a top secret security clearance, of which Oswald had. So who was this de Mohrenschildt? Every step of the way, you see his handlers helping him, right? When he was in New Orleans, he got a cover job at Riley Coffee, courtesy of CIA handler Guy Bannister. When he comes to Dallas, he gets the job at Jagger Child Steel, Stovall Childs, courtesy of his handler George de Mohrenschildt. And then later, after he's been handed off to Ruth Payne, his new handler, Ruth Payne, helps him get the job at the Texas School Book Depository. None of this is accomplished on Lee Harvey Oswald's own, the result of his own enterprise. Who was this George de Mohrenschildt? His father had been governor of the province of Minsk for the Tsar. Now, if you know anything about Oswald's time in the Soviet Union, that's where he lived. He lived in Minsk. Okay, so George de Mohrenschildt was extremely familiar with the city in Russia where Oswald lived during his time there. His family fled communism after the 1917 revolution. He was very well educated. He spoke Russian, French, German, Spanish, Polish, and English. I mean, you talk about a well-rounded individual. He worked for French intelligence during World War II, which means he was on our side, the Allied side. He earned a doctorate degree in international commerce and a master's degree in petroleum engineering and geology. He'd spent time in Ghana, Haiti, Guatemala, and Yugoslavia, all in efforts related to petroleum engineering and his geological background. He was a lifelong anti-communist, as you might expect, since his family basically got chased out of Russia after the Communist Revolution. He was a very ardent capitalist, and the mystery has always been how and why did this ardent capitalist, this anti-communist, fervent anti-communist, become friends with Lee Harvey Oswald, an avowed Marxist-Leninist, a pro-Castro sympathizer. They're on opposite sides of the fence politically and culturally as well, because you talk about a very learned man, spoke all these languages, had all these degrees, and then Oswald was a high school dropout. Now, he spoke a couple languages too, but just on its face, they come from different worlds. And of course, there's more to the story. According to researcher Gregory Burnham, George de Mohrenschildt was an active member of two CIA proprietary organizations. The one was the Dallas Council on World Affairs, and the second was the Crusade for a Free Europe. On February 19th, so de Mohrenschildt was CIA. You'll see more evidence of this in a minute. On February 1977, de Mohrenschildt confessed to William Oltmans, who was a Dutch journalist with the United Press International, UPI, talking about Oswald. And of course, this is 14 years later. And this is during the time, or the lead up to the time, during which the House Select Committee is investigating or re-investigating the JFK assassination, and George de Mohrenschildt's name has come up. And so there's some heat on him. There's some light on him that hadn't been there during the Warren Commission, because the Warren Commission glossed over all this. Anyway, he tells this Dutch journalist, William Oltmans, quote, "I am responsible. I feel responsible for the behavior of Lee Harvey Oswald because I guided him." This was February of 77. In March of 77, in the morning of that day, and that's important, the distinction, because lunchtime is going to be the line of demarcation. before lunch in the morning, he was talking to Edward J. Epstein of Reader's Digest, and he admitted to the Epstein in 1962. De Mohrenschildt was contacted by J. Walton Moore, a CIA employee in Dallas. Moore asked him to find out about Oswald's time in the Soviet Union. Now, see, put these dates together. This is March of 77. This is in 62, before the meeting when he first met Oswald in October of 62. So he was asked by the CIA to find out about Oswald's time in the Soviet Union. So in other words, the CIA is asking de Mohrenschildt to do something for them, to meet Oswald and to pick his brain about his time in the Soviet Union. And in return, he was promised help with an oil deal he was negotiating with Haiti. So there's something in it for him. The way it was communicated to de Mohrenschildt was, if you'll help us, we'll help you. You help us with Oswald, and we'll help you with your oil deal that you want with Haiti. So in March of 63, the following year, because of the help that he had provided the CIA with regard to Oswald, which he admitted to, he says, I'm responsible. I feel responsible for the behavior of Lee Harvey Oswald because I guided him. He was his handler. So in cooperation with the CIA, in exchange for agreeing to be Oswald's handler, he got his oil deal. So a few months later, March of 63, de Mohrenschildt got the contract from the Haitian government with the help of the CIA. And according to de Mohrenschildt, on March 29, 1970, now this is, remember I said there was a before lunch and there was an after lunch. So he's meeting with Epstein, and before lunch he tells him about this arrangement and how he got the oil contract. So then they break for lunch. They come back after lunch, and de Mohrenschildt returns to his room and finds an invite to meet with Gaten Fonzie, who's an investigator for the House Select Committee. So I told you, this is the time period during which the House Select Committee was reinvestigating the JFK assassination, and the George de Mohrenschildt angle, which had not been vigorously pursued by the Warren Commission. Surprise, surprise. The House Select Committee is looking into it, and they want to meet with them. And their chief investigator, Gaten Fonzie, wants to meet with him. So this is after lunch. He finds this invite. Well, later in the day, his daughter comes to, and here I am again, I'll turn it around. She comes to visit him at one of these apartments, whichever one he lived at, and I don't know which one he lived at, but there's thousands of units here. If you walk back in these streets, it just goes and goes and goes. And then if you walk along the front here, there's more gates as you go for more streets that go back with hundreds of more units. So I don't know which unit it was. His address technically was 2737. But anyway, his daughter comes over to visit, and she finds him dead of a massive gunshot wound to the head. A 20 gauge shotgun, double-barreled shotgun, is lying on the floor next to him, and the medical examiner rules the death a suicide. De Mohrenschildt's wife said, I do not accept that he committed suicide. They may get me too, but I'm not afraid. It's about time somebody looked into this thing. Now, I just told you that the reason he's being looked into is because the Warren Commission glossed over it in 63 and 64. And between 63 and 64, George de Mohrenschildt's close relationship with Lee Harvey Oswald had largely been unexamined, and the American people were not aware of it. But now all of a sudden, 77, 78, House Select Committee is looking into it, and they've sent an investigator down, and right on the heels of the investigator making contact with their subject, with George de Mohrenschildt, he turns up dead in his apartment, dead of a massive gunshot wound, and of course it's ruled a suicide. So all kinds of suspicions about what happened in that situation, where it appears that he was starting to talk, and then right on the heels of an invitation to talk to the investigator, before he could say to the investigator or say to the House Select Committee what he had already said to Epstein, what he had already said to that Dutch reporter, which was that he was involved with Oswald. He was guiding him as his handler, that he had been asked by the CIA to be Lee Harvey Oswald's handler in exchange for an oil contract with the Haitian government. That's pretty explosive testimony, and if it makes it into the record, you've got somebody who's still alive who has knowledge of Oswald's activities before the assassination, and not just from a second-hand source, not just from observation, but from somebody who was actually directing him and advising him. We already see that, acting on his advice, Oswald moved from Fort Worth into Dallas. So anyway, this is going to be a primo witness. But right before he can talk to Gate and Fonzie, he's talked to reporters, but that's none of that's on the record. Right before he can talk to Gate and Fonzie in the House Select Committee, his brains are blasted out. He's found dead in his apartment of a gunshot that's ruled a suicide. Now, I don't have to tell you how many times in the case of the JFK assassination, important witnesses die of, quote, suicide. You know, it's just over and over and over and over again. The way the gun was found on the floor, and the length of the gun, it's very difficult for a double-barreled shotgun of that length for someone to use it himself. You'd have to use your toes, basically, to fire to pull the trigger. It's too big of a weapon, too long of a barrel. So anyway, it looked like a setup, and of course, his wife wasn't buying it. She said, "This is not a suicide. They got to him, but I'm not afraid of him." And she basically says, "It's about time somebody look into this." So they've been carrying around whatever they know. They've been carrying around for 14 years. And as long as George de Mohrenschildt was no threat to the narrative, no threat to the story, no threat to the lone gunman theory, he was allowed to live. But as soon as he became a threat, as soon as it became apparent that the House Select Committee was interested in him, to the point where they send their investigator down to meet with him. You know, this is beyond the reporters. What he has said to the reporters has gotten the attention of the House Select Committee, but that's never been on the record. Now he's going on the record. But before he can, he's suicided. So this is I wanted to show you the location where he lived and talk briefly about the story of George de Mohrenschildt. Remember now, when he got that contract with the Haitian government for oil, that's why he handed Oswald off to Ruth Paine. He was preparing to leave the country to go do his oil job that he'd been rewarded with, this contract from the CIA in the negotiations with the Haitian government. And so he was handing off Oswald to Ruth Paine. From March on, and remember now, that's when Ruth Paine met the Oswalds, when George de Mohrenschildt introduced him. And then 2 months later, or less than 2 months later, Ruth Paine splits with her husband. He goes off, opens up a room in the house so that Lee Harvey Oswald's wife, Marina, and the 2 kids can move in with her. And she gets Oswald the job in Dallas at the Texas School Book Depository. You see the chronology? George de Mohrenschildt picked him up in October of '62, carried him until March of '63, at which time he went to Haiti to carry on his oil business as a result of his agreeing to be Oswald's handler, and hands him off to Ruth Paine. Ruth Paine takes him from there. Okay, on to the next site.